So I have a long relationship with religion, and I'll give a background of where this video is coming from, because I was never religious, and I think around 13 years old I began to hate religion with a passion. I remember getting in tons of debates in middle school and high school over religion, and not a single one could or would justify it, and I'd become completely disillusioned with almost every religious person or institution in my state. And I'm fine with that. But the older I become, I widen my idea of religion or faith in general. And when I thought a little deeper, I realized that while all religious people are not inherently mystic, not all mystics are religious. And this is something I will look further to later in the video. But in this video, I will make the definitive argument that faith is entirely baseless and idiotic rejection of reality itself, and that any, if not all, false and incorrect actions are based on the baseless mere belief that it could be done, and it's only through the rejection of logic that it can be done. And no, this will not be some sort of video where we look at the Bible and disprove certain events. It's entirely useless and futile. No, this video is a disproving of the supernatural, using pure logic in the building blocks of metaphysics and epistemology, and demonstrating how a rejection of logic makes you purely faith-based and unable to reason the rejection. We cannot properly address faith being the antithesis to reason without some common definitions. Logic, or reason as a definition, can be defined as observing the world through the evidence, non-contradictory claims, and generating ideas that are in alignment with the laws of reality. Reason is the faculty for integrating and identifying the evidence of the senses, meaning claims, truths, and knowledge that logically follow are based on logic, and are correct, as they correspond to the laws of reality and existence. We know them to be true. Faith means mystic, non-rational, nonsense-based, an apprehension of reality. Things accepted through blind faith, even if they are true, are not reasoned with logic. They reject the idea of knowing for believing. We can separate faith-based claims on two separate categories: claims that are true but based on faith, and claims that are false and based on faith. I can look at a rock, and if all I do is believe that the rock is there, the pure belief, this means that I am basing my knowledge on no facts of reality. I'm not deriving the rock from nature and the laws of physics. Even though the rock is there, I am intentionally rejecting my senses to pure illogical belief. The latter is practically no different. A rock is not there, yet you believe a rock is there. The rock in this scenario does not matter, but the belief of the rock does. Rather than empirically deriving from reality the rock's existence or non-existence through the senses, we know the rock is there. We do not believe the rock is there. This is what logic is. I believe these two definitions to be thorough enough and well enough thought out. This section will be used to prove objectively that by these definitions I provided, every single action that is within the initiation of conflict over scarce means or innocently with reality are purely a rejection of reason and therefore faith-based. Let's take the classic example of Crusoe on Friday. If you already understand the basic gist of this example, just skip to the timestamp here. But anyway, let's continue. Imagine Crusoe on Friday on an island. Crusoe discovers a stick left in nature and decides to homestead it. Crusoe is the first comer to this stick, and any later comers are the latecomers. The distinction is created once the stick has been homesteaded, i.e. taken from nature with the intent to own. Now imagine Friday walking along the island and notices Crusoe using his stick to spearfish. Friday comes along and wants Crusoe's stick to stoke his fire. In Friday's action of attempting to take Crusoe's stick, he has initiated aggression. And because means are scarce, this calls for property ownership. The first comer, or the non-aggressor, is the correct and just owner of the stick, that being Crusoe, and the late comer to this stick being the aggressor, that being Friday. We must understand that conflict means contradictory actions, such as A cannot be not A. We can translate this to only Crusoe or Friday can be the just owner of the stick. Knowing all this, we can assume Crusoe is the just owner of the stick and not Friday. It's because Crusoe is the non-aggressor and the first comer to the stick, and Friday initiating the conflict means as he initiated a contradictory action. Crusoe must exist to own the stick, and Friday must exist to initiate the conflict. On top of this, Friday cannot justify this conflict without demonstrating a preference for argumentation. These are contradictory actions because Friday cannot justify aggression without showing a preference for non-aggression. Thus, there is no way to justify aggression. So, what is important about this? Well, remember how Friday cannot justify his actions. Logically, he cannot without proposing ethics not in accordance with reality. So he's not logically justifying his claim, or when he initiated the conflict, he was definitely not basing his actions on logic. So what is he doing? It's clearly not logical. There is no logical claim to base his actions or his beliefs on. It's only by mere illogical, faith-based belief that he is correct, contradictory to reality, so to speak. All aggression is objectively unjustifiable and false. This means that every act of aggression or initiation of conflict is purely illogical mysticism, and every single aggression is anti-logical. It is pure idiotic faith. Surely there is no such thing as logical aggression, only faith-based aggression. We can provide a logical syllogism for this here. Along with this not only proves aggression being unjustifiable, but faith as well. If you think about it, it just makes sense. Logic is the process of justification and reasoning, while faith is the rejection of justification, as justification is the logical proof of something to be right or reasonable, while faith has no proof. Faith is, by definition, the definition we have provided, the rejection of deriving logical sense-based truth formatted through a consistent reality. The syllogism also provides that every single act of aggression, stealing, murder, terrorism, genocide, rape, every single form of aggression that has existed, is happening right now, and will exist, was all on the basis of faith, and of a rejection of logical a priori and a posteriori truths, and this at the whims of mere faith and mysticism. To add to this, if someone is attempting to defend an unjustifiable or faith-based view, they are 1. Rejecting epistemology, anything can be true or false. 2. Attempting a subjective ethic, which can be rejected on subjective grounds. And 3. Believing what is true is predicated on faith, arbitrary belief, rather than what actually exists in reality. On the topic of epistemology and ontology of faith, I take a quote from Idlework. If someone comes up to you and they're absolutely convinced that there is a real-life squirrel living inside their heads, they can't explain it. They know you won't find it there if you do surgery, but nevertheless, they insist on the realism of the squirrel, that it isn't just a narrative character fiction, that the squirrel definitely exists. What must you conclude? You can say they're insane, but what must you conclude about the squirrel, though? What is the squirrel's ontological status? If someone comes up to you absolutely convinced that each of us are embodied with a spirit that you can't find via surgery, they can't explain it, but they know for sure that when you die, it moves position, otherwise goes to under a transformative experience, etc., etc. What must you conclude about the ontological status of this spirit object? That it is indeed imaginative. And if your answer isn't imaginative or figurative, then how does the conclusion to believe that you have some sort of spirit or a soul, that you somehow have some magic god that soars around the universe with no logical justification as to why, differ from the man who is similarly convinced of his perceptions of a squirrel in his head, or a meth addict who believes that there are spiders in his arm, or a schizophrenic psychopath madman who has his uncircumcised penis thinking it's an elephant trunk? I would like a genuine answer as the separation of a man who believes that there is a creator of the universe, prophesies to have some metaphysically impossible antichrist who has convinced people to take some sort of mark on their right hand as two prophets are killed and brought back to life, and all the national assembly come to trek Jerusalem. And this after 7 years will bring the second coming of Christ, where the kills the antichrist rescues the Jews, but you can be brought back in heaven if you believe in God. To the deranged, schizophrenic, homeless man meth addict who strips himself naked and cuts his arms open trying to dig out imaginary spiders with an abandoned rusty heroin needle infected with Clostridium tetani. There is no logical justification as to these separations. They are both entirely faith-based and delusional.
In the beginning, there was nothing. Then God said, "Let there be Australia!"
On a hippie trailhead full of zombies, I met a strange lady.
The supernatural is an epistemological, ontological, metaphysical, and logical, all the different forms of reason, is a pure rejection of all of them. A pure impossibility. I will explain with a passion as to why. First, let's define the supernatural. The supernatural is literally just the personification of the contradictory. A supernatural entity is the rejection of the laws of reality in nature itself. To debunk the supernatural is insanely easy. If contradictions do not exist in reality, then the supernatural is a metaphysical impossibility. Which the supernatural is literally the biggest fuck you to the law of non-contradiction. If you want a more in-depth answer, we can provide another syllogism here, and get into some counters to this argument. The primacy of conscious fallacy states that existence is a product and subordinate to a divine consciousness, typically God. This is a notion explicit in the early Christian thinking. Advocates of this view may pose questions similar to who created the universe, because they reject the notion that existence can stem without a source or an infinite regress. However, these same individuals accept the existence of a supernatural consciousness as a starting point. Such individuals may concur that there exists an irreducible primary, but are dissatisfied with the primacy being attributed to existence itself. We can get to existence having primacy from the premise that consciousness has primacy. Multiple things can't have primacy. But consciousness must exist in reality. How could God, a conscious being, exist before reality? Consciousness is what perceives reality. How can consciousness exist before reality exists? We can even put this as a simple two-word sentence. Consciousness exists. That means existence must come before consciousness, because if existence comes after consciousness, then this makes no sense and consciousness cannot exist. And further, a primacy of consciousness implies an infinite regress. That is, if some divine consciousness be deemed necessary to explain existence, then subsequently another divine consciousness will be expected for reasoning similar. The cycle evidently will continue endlessly without an end. As such, no explanation for existence is truly reached. Such proponents then assert that this is in fact impossible to inquire regarding a deity's reason for existing, that the latter is intrinsically necessary. But this is just an entire cop-out to say, I don't have an answer, just trust me, bro. The individual thus chooses to depart from the realm of confirmable, observable, and rational, and ascends to the unknowable, to the impalpable, the incomprehensible, and to the non-verifiable. In this fashion, nothing of substance is discovered, no answers are brought about. The procedure is entirely futile. The adherent of this view merely elects to leave the plane of reality for the ethereal and unachievable. And in this action, the procedure produces no fruits. The only answer with any form or non-contradictory reason is that existence merely exists, has always existed. Existence exists is the most fundamental axiom in all of philosophy, and any deviation from having this at the root leads to complete logical chaos. is by rejecting the axiom that existence is an infinite concept with no start or end that you have cut off your ontological fruit tree at the roots, meaning no philosophical nutrients can derive anywhere past this. The view that consciousness, mere thoughts, have any form of metaphysical primacy over existence, that if you merely think something to be the case and it is the case, is utterly rationalist nonsense. Anytime the theist, or more broadly the rationalist, merely uses a concept or an idea, they are using the concept while denying the validity of its genetic roots, i.e. an earlier concept on which it logically depends on. No logical reasoning can be implied if the mere thoughts have metaphysical primacy over existence. Should existence exist, that it would have metaphysical primacy, it cannot be a product or manifestation derived from some true reality at its root, such as God, society, or any person's urges, but rather it is the true reality itself. In this fashion, the elements of existence are uncreated and eternal, and its laws are immutable. The primacy of conscious viewpoint ascribes precisely the latter point to consciousness. A thing is or does what consciousness ordains, it says. A does not have to be A if consciousness does not wish it to be so. This viewpoint represents the rejection of all the basic actions. It is an attempt to have existence and eat it too. To have it because without existence there would be no consciousness. To eat it because the theory wants existence to be malleable to someone's mental contents, i.e., it wants existence to shrug off all restrictions of identity in order to obey someone's desires, i.e., it wants existence to exist as nothing in particular, but existence is identity. A common error related to the primacy of consciousness is the assumption that the universe requires a cause. It is asked, what caused existence to exist? And other such nonsense. I find the unmoved mover argument entirely unconvincing in every form I've ever heard it explained. We can summarize the unmoved mover argument in this simple 3-point argument. Now, if we assume that everything requires a prior mover, we have an infinite regress. This is the problem with this argument. They go, well, everything is contingent on something before, and that's why it's not an infinite regress, which is the opposite of truth. People say to this, well, yeah, this is true, unless we have an unmoved mover, not bound by the same physical laws as the universe. This would contradict the assumption that everything requires a previous mover. So which is it? Does everything require a previous mover or not? Of course they'd say everything natural or physical does, but is God natural? No, he's supernatural, they say. This is an assumption, though, that there is some supernatural thing. Why could it not be that it's just an infinite regress? And if we want to get real granular, we don't know a priori that everything requires a previous mover. The point remains that we can't just assume this. Recall that the law of causality does not state that every entity has a cause. Rather, it states that every action has a cause, and that all action is action of entities. This is the same similar problem with mystics who claim the Big Bang is a sign or some sort of proof of the first mover. First of all, time does not start at the Big Bang. The Big Bang is not even a philosophical concept. The Big Bang is outside of philosophy. Second, whether there was a Big Bang is irrelevant to the argument. Accurately speaking, the universe is eternal, meaning it has no beginning. It's not as if there was no universe and then some event caused there to be a universe. This is nonsensical. We just explained the impossibility of a first mover. Did the Big Bang happen? Most likely, yes. Whether there was a Big Bang is irrelevant to the argument. If there was a Big Bang, it didn't cause the universe to come into existence, which isn't the claim made by Big Bang theorists. Rather, the claim is prior to the Big Bang, the matter which makes up the universe was collected in an infinitely dense singularity which then exploded for some reason or another. Whether that's the particles shifting into one specific place and time at the right moment, it's not really relevant. Well, God is an explanation for the why, they say. But how did you get to that explanation as opposed to any number of competing explanations? The point is that the theist will never be able to escape either of these fallacies. They are inescapable. Attempting to put your ontological fruit tree at the roots only implies a stilling concept fallacy. Because when modern philosophers declare that axioms are a matter of arbitrary choice and proceed to choose complex derivative concepts as the alleged axioms of their alleged reasoning, one could observe that their statements imply and depend on existence, consciousness, identity, which they profess to negate, which are smuggled into their arguments in some form of unacknowledged stolen concepts. Comparatively, this is equivalent to shoving a dead flower stem into the dirt and expecting it to grow. There is no root, there is no support. What's the flower supposed to grow off of if there's no logical basis or root to support any of the myriad of ideas to come from it? Theological philosophy can be snipped from the root, but rather they did this for me. So there is no need for me to do anything else but explain how. There is a subsection of theists I like to call theist hippies. Rather, a subsection of theists who believe God is some sort of whimsical way to explain nature. More closely to a deist. The primary differentiator is that these deists believe God is not a supernatural entity, but a natural one, set in physical reality. This is a scapegoat, dirt-poor way of justifying God, such as, I would say God is truth and more than so a personification of truth. Further, Jesus is the ideal man, the correct man, or something stupid like that. I could say that God refers to the apple tree in my garden, and say, checkmate atheists. But this clearly is not what is meant by God. God is a supernatural entity. There is an apple in my garden. This does not validate that God refers to the apple tree in my garden. This is an apple, not God. Saying an apple is the essence of God or some mystical bullshit is a whole other thing you can refer back to that Idleworth quote about. There is another form of mystics who believed God is some sort of supercomputer or something. Yeah, you can say that the God is just the supercomputer database of the universe, but think about how uselessly you're able to justify what this even means. Compared to how well you're able to explicate clearly all of the possible phenomenon in the universe. Saying an apple on an apple tree is entirely useless to just calling it an apple. There's no way to even prove that this is some sort of God. It's entirely useless. This is just some 21st century garbage someone made up. So in conclusion, the supernatural does not exist. It is non-existent, and no way can it be justified. Faith is entirely baseless in the idiotic rejection of reality itself, and that any, if not all, false and incorrect actions are based on the baseless mere belief that it could be done. And that is only through the rejection of logic that it can be done. I could go about theology is literally anti-humanity, or how it supports taxation, or how it literally says to reject the world for things that don't even exist, which is an anti-humanity ethic. But it's entirely futile because people just say I'm interpreting a passage wrong and throw out the notion that we can use intersubjective terms to describe reality, and saying any words can mean anything throws out the entire use of language itself. But I don't feel like getting into a long-ass debate about all that. Anyway, subscribe for more gay porn.